I used to be stuck in the pentatonic boxes, just noodling and struggling to play through the chord changes for a long, long time. In this video, I'm going to share an approach to understanding the pentatonic scales that helps you start flowing and following through the chord changes when you're improvising. This is something that I wish I would have learned a lot sooner as an intermediate guitarist. So we're going to look at some misconceptions around the pentatonic scale and some more useful ways to think about the pentatonics in order to start confidently following the chord changes when we're improvising instead of just randomly kind of noodling up and down these boxes. If you don't know who I am, my name is Fabian Dolan. I've been obsessed with playing and practicing the guitar for over a decade at this point. In that time, I've earned myself a music degree. I play in a band, I regularly write music, and after a lot of struggle, I can now confidently and creatively express myself on the instrument in a way that I'm satisfied with on the guitar. For example, like if someone asked me to just play the instrument at a moment's notice in either a jam session or something like that, I don't feel any kind of like roadblocks or hesitation or struggle to play the instrument and make things sound musical. So, with all of that in mind, the goal of this channel is just to share the things that have helped me along the way. And hopefully, the things that I share are also going to be somewhat useful to everyone watching as well. So, these are all the things that I'm currently using in my playing all the time. These are all the things that have genuinely helped me kind of overcome those intermediate roadblocks and help me achieve the goals of just playing the instrument and being able to understand what I'm doing on the guitar, understand how to improvise through chord changes, understand how to create your own musical ideas at a moment's notice. So yeah, again, with all of that in mind, hopefully the things I'm going to share today land with you and resonate and help you improve at the instrument as well. Before we get started, if you want to reliably find great educational videos for intermediate level guitarists without having to rely upon the randomness of the YouTube algorithm, check out my free school community down below in the description. I've curated a playlist of useful videos that are going to help strengthen your weaknesses, helping you make lasting improvements on the guitar. So if you want a reliable resource with useful videos for intermediate guitarists, again, I've got a playlist in my free school community. You can join in the link in the description. So a big problem in my playing that I had for a long time that left me confused with understanding what I was supposed to be doing when improvising was not understanding the relationship between chords and scales. And we're going to tackle that problem in today's video. So we're going to look at some kind of advanced jazz concepts, but we're not actually going to play any jazz music. I don't expect anyone watching today to care about jazz or want to play jazz or want to kind of play these fancy chords. It's just useful to take a bit of that jazz theory understanding and apply it into everything that we're currently doing, whether that's jazz or not. So yeah, we're going to look at some concept there today. Hopefully everything lands, and I'll do my best to explain things as simply as possible. But yeah, going back to the point I was making earlier, a big problem in my playing was not understanding the link between chords and scales. They're actually extremely deeply related to each other. When you don't understand how chords and scales are related to each other, you're going to be stuck noodling permanently. You don't even understand why you're even using a scale in the first place. And again, it turns out to understand why you're using a scale, you've got to understand how it relates to a certain chord. Now, to tackle that problem, let's start somewhere that we know for sure is 100% related to a chord. So I'm going to play the C major bar chord over here. Everyone watching this video right now understands that whenever you have a chord, you also have like an arpeggio that matches that chord as well. So I've got this C major chord, and then if I play like a C major arpeggio, we understand those two things are extremely deeply related. The arpeggio is the exact same thing as the chord, right? It's the exact same notes. I'm just playing a root, third, fifth, and then a root. And then inside of this chord shape, I'm only playing roots, thirds, and fifths. So this is a root, this is a fifth, a root, then there's a third here, then there's a fifth, and a root, right? So the exact same notes I'm using inside of this arpeggio are also the exact same notes I'm using inside of this chord. They're deeply related, right? We probably also understand that whenever we have a a chord, we have to align it with the correct arpeggio. So when I'm playing the C major chord, I obviously want to play this C major arpeggio. It's going to sound a bit weird if I play like the C major chord and then try to play a B major over the top of that. Those two things, they aren't related. They're not the same thing, right? B major does not work over, the B major arpeggio does not work over the C major chord. We understand that we've got to align the correct arpeggio with the correct chord, right? So that's just the foundation we're going to look at today. We understand that there are things in music that are related to these chords, and an arpeggio is probably a great example of that. We probably also understand that there are some more kind of complex, fancy chords that we can play sometimes. So, for example, we might know that there are things called like suspended chords. So I could play like a C sus2 like this, right? And we probably also know that there is an arpeggio that matches this chord. So I can play like a C suspended. I can play like a C suspended 2 arpeggio. Like we understand that whenever we have a chord, we have an arpeggio that perfectly matches it. And again, it doesn't matter how complicated that chord is. I could play, I don't know, let's play this chord over here. This is a G minus 6 add 9. And again, the point of this at the moment is not to kind of tell you to start playing these fancy chords, right? The point is that whenever we have a chord, no matter how complicated or simple it is, there's going to be an arpeggio that matches that chord using the exact same notes of the chord. So there is going to be a G minus 6 add 9 arpeggio that you can play to fit over the top of that fancy chord. So again, the point here is that arpeggios and chords are deeply related. No matter how complicated or simple the chord is, there's always going to be an arpeggio that matches it, right? So with that kind of like foundation, we're going to explore looking at scales and how we can start to turn scales into chords. And that means if a scale is the same thing as a chord, you can turn that chord into an arpeggio, which means scales and arpeggios are kind of the same thing. Now, again, I'm going to get into this point in a couple of minutes. There's one thing I kind of have to get out of the way to help us understand this point as much as possible, and that's the idea of extensions inside of chords. So I'm briefly going to explain this as quickly as possible. So we probably know that, like, again, to make a C major chord, all that I'm doing is playing a C major triad, a root third, and a fifth. So I've got root, third, fifth, that's C major. We can also kind of like add in notes. We can add in extra intervals to make our chord sound more colorful. So if you've ever seen a chord before that's like C add 6, basically what that means is you're taking just the regular C major chord and you're adding the interval of a sixth. So I could take C major like this, and because I've got a root here, I've got my root note, I've got my third, fifth, I can add in a sixth, like here. Again, this is an impractical shape because I have to use like two hands to play it. But this is a C add 6 chord. So I'm just playing C major, and then with my index finger, I'm adding in the interval of a sixth. Again, the point here is not to like tell you to play stupid chords like this. It's just to conceptually show you that like whenever you have just a basic major triad or a minor triad, you can add in an extra interval to make it sound more colorful. Now, so we understand that we can add in extra intervals to make things more colorful, but we've probably heard of like terms before, like an add 9 or like an 11th or a 13th. And those kind of higher numbers, they always used to intimidate me when I'd hear them inside of chords because I was absolutely clueless about what they meant. So intervals like ninths, 11ths, and 13ths, there's something called upper extensions. So let me explain how upper extensions work as simply as possible. So we all know that our intervals, they come from like the major scale. So we've got like our root note. You can think about that as like the first, right? Then we have the second, and we have the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 7. And then obviously the octave is the root note just up higher, right? You can think what happens after the 7th, right? We get to the octave. You can think of the octave as like an 8th, right? Again, it's in the name oct, like octopus, 8 legs, right? So you can think of the octave as the 8th interval, right? So if the octave is the root note, what is the note above an octave? Well, it's just the second, right? But what's after 8? It's 9. So the second is just, the ninth is just a second up an octave, right? It's the same note as the second up an octave. So again, this is the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. My second is D. If I play D up an octave, it's the ninth, right? So basically these intervals, they carry on after 8, the octave, and we just kind of follow the numbers up that way. So after the octave, that's the 8th, I guess you could call it, ninth, which is the same thing as the second. Then we have the 10th, which is basically the same thing as a third up an octave. Then after that, we have the 11th, which is the same thing as a fourth up an octave. Then we have the 12th, which is basically the same thing as a fifth up an octave. Then we have a 13th, which is the same thing as a sixth up an octave. Then we have, that's a minor 7. Then we have a 7th, which is the same thing as a 14th up an octave. So basically these upper extensions, numbers like 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, they just refer to the regular intervals, just up an octave. We just keep counting up from 8 to find those extra numbers. So the main upper extensions that you're going to find inside of chords all the time are the 9th, 11th, and 13th. So it is very, very useful to just memorize the fact that the 9th is the same as the second. It's the same note. You just move it up an octave. The 11th is the same thing as the 4th. Again, the same note as the 4th. You just move it up an octave. And then the 13th is the same thing as a 6th. You just move it up an octave. Those are the 3 most common upper extensions. So now that we have the idea of like upper extensions out the way, I want to make my point about scales and how they're technically the same thing as a chord. So let's look at the A minor pentatonic. I've got 5 notes. I've got A, C, D, D, G, and A. And we should probably all know by now that to create a pentatonic scale, we need a root note, or to create a minor pentatonic scale even, we need a root note, we need a minor third, we need a perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor 7th, and then again back to the root note. So we've got 5 intervals: root, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor 7, and then back to the root. Now, if we look at the intervals inside of this scale, we can see that we've got a root, a third, and a fifth. So I've got root, third, fifth. That's part of the minor pentatonic. It's a subsection of the intervals. If I combine all of those together, right, I get a minor chord. So that kind of shows you how the scale is related to a chord, because with the intervals inside of the scale, you can create a chord, right? So you can kind of see how the notes from a scale also create a chord, right? So far, we've got 3 notes from this A minor pentatonic, which we can use to create the A minor triad, right? That leaves us with 2 extra notes that we're working with here. So we've got a perfect fourth and a minor 7th that we're not playing yet. So what happens if we add those 2 notes into the chord as like fancy extensions, right? So we could create a 5-note chord using all 5 of the intervals from this minor pentatonic scale. So I could play like A minor, the root, the third and the fifth, and somehow I've got to find a way to add in a 4th and a minor 7th into the chord, right? The thing is, we mentioned earlier, we have like upper extensions, right? So I can take my 4th and move it up an octave, giving me an 11th. When I do that, I can create a chord that's a minor 7 add 11 chord. So I'll get to that in a second. Let's just figure out one note at a time. So far, we've got like the root third and fifth. If I find a minor 7, I can add that into the shape. If I add the note if I add the interval of a minor 7th into this chord, so now I'm playing 4 notes. Again, all of those notes that I'm playing are part of that minor pentatonic scale. Now I've got to figure out a way to add in that final note, the 4th or the 11th. So currently I'm playing root, 3rd, 5th, and minor 7th. I've got to find a way to add in the note of the 4th or the 11th. When I do that, I can play this chord shape like this, which is a very, very fancy sounding chord. It kind of sounds like something Andy Summers in The Police would play, or maybe like David Gilmour in a Pink Floyd song. Anyway, let me break down all of the notes that's going on inside of this chord voicing. So I got my root note A, which again is part of that A minor pentatonic. It's one of the intervals. Then I'm playing the minor 3rd, which is C. Again, that's one of the pentatonic intervals. And I'm playing the perfect 5th, which is E. Again, that's one of the intervals inside of this minor pentatonic scale. Then I'm playing the minor 7th, which is G. Again, that's one of the intervals inside of the minor pentatonic scale. And then the final note I'm playing over here is D, which is the 4th, but because I've moved it up an octave, because it's the highest pitch, it becomes an 11th. So what I'm trying to explain here is that when you arrange all of the notes from the minor pentatonic in a certain way, you can create a fancy chord with it, right? The point is not to tell you to start using this fancy chord, or that you have to be like a jazz nerd who wants to like play that chord all the time, right? That's not the point. The point is that when we take all of the intervals we can find in a scale and arrange them in a certain way, we can create a fancy extended chord. If all of those intervals from that scale can create a chord, whenever we have a chord, we can also arpeggiate it, right? So what I'm getting at here is that the minor pentatonic is pretty much the exact same thing as a minor 7 add 11 arpeggio, right? And again, the point here is not to tell you to start using an A minor 7 add 11 arpeggio, right? You can forget about the idea of that fancy arpeggio. The point I'm trying to make is that if you think about the pentatonic scale more like an arpeggio, where it has to match a certain chord, it becomes a lot easier to start flowing through the chord changes. Now, I'm going to go into more detail on this later on when I show you an example of me using it in my playing over the top of a backing track. But before we get there, I also want to show you how this exact same concept can work for the major pentatonic as well. We can also turn the intervals of a major pentatonic into a fancy extended major chord, which means if it's a chord, we can also turn it into an arpeggio, which means the major pentatonic is also the same thing as a fancy arpeggio. And again, the point is that if you think about using the pentatonic like an arpeggio, i.e. it has to match a certain type of chord, it becomes a lot easier to flow through these chord changes. So let me show you how this works with the major pentatonic. So let's look at the C major pentatonic. That sounds something like this. So we should probably know that it's a 5-note scale, and to create the major pentatonic, we need the interval of a root, we need a major 2nd, we need a major 3rd, we need a perfect 5th, a major 6th, and then back to the root again. So I've got my 5 notes. We've got C, D, E, G, A, and then back to C. Again, let's break down the intervals inside of this pentatonic, right? We've got a root, 3rd, and a 5th at least. So we've got root, C, 3rd, E, 5th, G, right? I can play a C major triad with those intervals. right? We also have two other intervals. We've got the second, which was D, over here, and then we have the sixth, which was A, right? So what happens if we start to add in those intervals on top as well? So let's add in the sixth. This is what I did earlier, right? I can play the sixth like that. So now I've got 4 out of the 5 notes from this major pentatonic inside of a chord. So this is my root on the low E. This is my major 6 on the A string. I've got a root note again on the D string. Got my major 3rd on the G string. And my perfect 5th on the B string. So right now I'm using 4 out of the 5 notes: root, major 6, major 3rd, and major 5th, which leaves us with the major 2nd to use. Again, when we take a major 2nd and move it all the way up an octave, it becomes a 9th. So if I add the 9th into this chord, I get all 5 notes from the major pentatonic played together to create a fancy sounding chord. Which again, that sounds like really, really beautiful. And again, the point here is not to tell you to start using these fancy chords. Again, this is like I would never use this chord in my playing, right? This is an impossible shape to play. I have to kind of use my index finger to fret down one of the notes, right? Again, the point here is not to tell you to use these fancy chords. It's to show you that when you take all of the intervals from a pentatonic scale and arrange it in a certain way, you can create a fancy extended chord with the same 5 notes from your scale, which means the notes from your scale can be created into a chord, which means if the same notes from the scale are a chord, you can also arpeggiate that chord. Again, meaning like this, they're kind of the same thing. The chord is the same thing as the arpeggio. The scale is the same thing as the arpeggio of that fancy chord, right? Again, I can't repeat this enough. The point is not about learning these kind of fancy jazz chords. It's to start thinking about the pentatonic more like an arpeggio rather than a scale we can just mindlessly run up and down, right? So with all of that in mind, understanding that we can take the notes from a scale and turn them into a chord, that shows us how chords and scales are related, by the way. That's the point I was trying to make at the start of the video, that they're kind of the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. When you have a scale, you're kind of just playing the notes individually, but you can turn all of those individual notes into a chord by arranging them in a certain way. You have all of the ingredients, you have all of the intervals from a scale that you need to create a chord. Chords and scales are deeply related. That's the overarching type of point that I'm trying to make here. Now, with all of that in mind, now I want to show you how I'm thinking about this kind of information to help me improvise and follow through the chord changes instead of just noodling up and down through random scale shapes. So here's what I would do over the top of a backing track to think about treating these pentatonic scale positions more like an arpeggio. So far, we've established that we can take all of the notes from a pentatonic scale, we can arrange them in a certain order to create a chord with extensions. Now, that chord can be arpeggiated, and all of the notes from that arpeggio of that chord are the same thing as the scale notes. Now, that can kind of seem like some kind of theoretical, advanced nonsense that is way too confusing. In reality, the application of this idea is a lot simpler than you would think. So here's what we want to do over a backing track. Right now, I'm playing over the chords A minor and then G major. So there's only 2 chords going on the whole time. We want to think about using these pentatonic scales the same way we would use an arpeggio for this chord progression. So for example, if we were using arpeggios, obviously we would use A minor over A minor and then G major over G major, right? We want to do the pentatonics the same way. So A minor, I use the A minor pentatonic. And then when G major happens, I use the G major pentatonic. And you can hear that it sounds like it matches the chord a lot more smoother when we play the corresponding pentatonic of each chord. So we've got to adjust when the chord changes, the same way we would adjust the arpeggio when the chord changes. And again, you can use whatever scale position you want for each of these chords. I'm just using these two at the moment. I could play A minor over here. So this is box 1. I could move up to box 2. And then I could use like G major like over here. Right? What matters is that I'm playing the G major pentatonic over G, and then the A minor pentatonic over A. So I'm kind of thinking about using these like arpeggios. And what I mean by that is that when the chord changes, the pentatonic scale changes to match that chord. So A minor. It's the A minor pentatonic right now. And then I gotta find the G major pentatonic now. And then back to the A minor pentatonic. And now I've got to switch to the G major pentatonic. Again, you can use whatever scale shapes you want for each of these pentatonics anywhere you want on the fretboard. You've just got to make sure that you align with the correct chord. So that means when A minor is happening, you only play the A minor pentatonic. And then when it changes to G major, you only play the G major pentatonic. If you found today's video useful, please feel free to share what's been helpful in the comments down below. It's always really nice to see inside of videos, people sharing their experience on how they're improving at the guitar as a result of maybe something that I shared. So again, if there's anything that you found useful inside this video, please feel free to comment it down below. And again, if you have any kind of questions as well, maybe there might be something in the back of your mind that is a bit confusing around the stuff I explained in today's video. Again, please feel free to ask a question in those comments down below as well. Now, if you're an intermediate guitar player and you really want to crack the puzzle of improvisation across the fretboard, I have a step-by-step roadmap and program which is designed for intermediate guitarists to help them make sense of how to improvise across the fretboard. So if you've always been confused by how to improvise and you don't know what you're supposed to do to practice improving that skill in your guitar playing, you can check out the link below to see if you qualify for my program. If you still want to stay on YouTube, I've also got some more YouTube videos for you. You can also watch this video right here, which is also going to give you another improvisational skill that's going to be extremely useful.